Welcome back to the Ramen Club Podcast, where we discuss stories, tactics, and actionable insights that will help you take your bootstrap startup to ramen profitable and beyond. Today, we have a very special guest, a long-time member and friend of the Ramen Club community, Andy Cloke. Andy is the founder of Datafetcher, an Airtable plugin letting you connect Airtable to any application or API with no code. On today's episode, you'll learn how Andy bootstrapped past 10k MRR, his framework for discovering profitable SaaS ideas, how he came up with his ramen profitable goal, and much more. I was very excited about this conversation, and it more than lived up to my expectations. So without further ado, let's get into this one. Hello, Andy. How are you doing, mate?
Yeah, good. Great to be here.
I think we've done one or two of the interviews before over the years as you've hit kind of certain milestones, but I think it's nice to hit like the kind of quintessential indie hacker milestone of 10k and kind of check in with you and see how things have been going.
Yeah, Ramen Club's been a huge part of it, and we came before that with like my last project and this one. Yeah, it's been a massive part of it.
Yeah, well, it's been great having you in the community from day one. So, the feeling's definitely mutual. And, there's with these podcasts, like you kind of, sometimes you do go over like, questions that you may have answered in the past before or a lot recently. But I do think for a lot of people, sometimes the simple questions are very valuable. So I think just for those who are not too used to you, Andy, and your story and Datafetcher, why don't you describe a bit more about what Datafetcher does and who it's for?
So Datafetcher is an Airtable extension. For anyone that's not familiar with Airtable, it's very similar to Google Sheets. For some use cases, it's a lot more easy to use. And so a lot of kind of small businesses will use it to manage their operations. And yeah, Datafetcher sits on their marketplace. So they've got a marketplace similar to how Shopify or HubSpot or whatever do. So it's an extension of their marketplace. And what it does specifically is it lets you import data from other places. So if you want to pull in metrics, Google Analytics, prices from Finance API, any sort of third party, it lets you do that. And so it's quite similar to a tool like Zapier or what was Integromat is now Make.com. But for certain use cases, it's kind of a lot easier to use Datafetcher specifically because it kind of sits within Airtable. So you're not changing tabs. It can do certain things that Zapier and other tools can't. And so it's kind of a competitor to Zapier's Airtable integration rather than like the whole of Zapier, right? Which is how I've managed to kind of carve out a little niche for it as sort of one person team.
I guess with API type tools like this, there's just like, creating like a customer persona must almost become difficult because like there's so many ways that people could use it or like different types of companies and that kind of thing. But like, are there any kind of typical just commonalities between your customers or just like ways you think of different types of personas?
There's a few different kind of major like use cases that I see over and over. And then often they're using the same API, right? So it'll be marketers connecting to Google Analytics, connecting to Facebook ads, trying to pull their metrics, or it'll be agencies doing that on behalf of their clients. So like marketing agencies want to pull everything into Airtable and then create like reporting in it that they then show to their clients. So that's kind of a massive one. And then like another big one is like finance and like crypto and exchange rates and stuff like that. So people kind of managing their personal portfolio or like, their kind of their company stuff through Airtable. So those are two of the really big, just like common use cases. But then I see kind of types of personas. And what this often is like someone's using a legacy system. For example, like if they run like a suite of like yoga studios, they've got to use Mindbody Online because that's like everyone uses to do their bookings and their class management and stuff. But they're using that, but they don't actually like it very much. So they're stuck with it. They can't change all their booking processes. But they want to get their data out of that legacy system into Airtable because Airtable is really nice to use. And so they use Datafetcher to basically just import everything every 15 minutes. Everything is pulled in from the legacy system into Airtable where they can build automations. They can create like client portals, whatever they need to do. And so I've got a few people. So there's one using like a Chalet CRM, one using Mindbody Online. And like there's all sorts of different CRMs and kind of old systems like that they're kind of piping the data into Airtable. So I'm starting to see, a few use cases that come up again and again. But as you say, it's super broad. And so in some ways that's great because it means I'll never run out of like content topics or kind of integrations to build, but it does make targeting those people like quite a lot harder, right? So the one thing they've all got in common is they're Airtable users. And so I think staying in the niche of Airtable is going to be the path forward with all the sort of platform risk and kind of other nuances that come with that.
Yeah, I definitely want to touch on that a little bit later. And just on the different types of API-based use cases, like have you seen any kind of that you can talk about, any particularly like weird or funny or just like memorable sort of things that people have been using it for?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, probably the strangest one the one I was most surprised paid for data fetcher. So there's a sewing social network, right, where people swap sewing patterns. It's called Ravelry. It's been going for like 10 years. It's got Wikipedia page and stuff. Someone's connecting to their API and importing sewing patterns on a schedule to Airtable, and they're like a paid user, which is mental. Someone else, they're like a OnlyFans person or like a streamer. They're pulling in their like metrics from like one of these like adult streaming sites. Yeah, there's so many niche ones.
There's lots of like tactical stuff I want to ask you about, but before we get to that, I just want to ask a little bit more about you, just a bit about your journey to get to this point. You know, you've gone from 0 to 10k MRR. It's quite a feat, but like before that, so I understand that you didn't study software engineering at university, right? You studied, was it mechanical engineering?
It was kind of everything. So, uni I went to you just studied like general engineering. And the idea was first year, you kind of studied a bit of everything, and then you slowly specialized. You graduated as a civil engineer or mechanical engineer or whatever. I realized within the first year that I didn't particularly like any kind of engineering. And so managed to change course to engineering, economics and management, which is great because it was a bit broader. Studied a load of like macroeconomics and quite interesting stuff like that. But yeah, graduated with like a hodgepodge of different engineering modules and some econ and management stuff. Yeah. And then after that, kind of had this feeling in my gut. I'd always like messed about with building little websites and stuff, but not really taking it that seriously. Like I'd done a couple for like mates, or I'd messed about with WordPress and I'd built like my mum a site for her business and like little things like that. And I kind of always knew like I'm probably going to end up doing that, but I'd never really like sat down and learned to code properly. And so, yeah, I graduated, messed about a bit. I went traveling and stuff, and then realized I kind of needed to get a career at some point. So like basically moved home and just learned to code for 3 or 4 months. And that was kind of, how I kind of made the switch. And then, got a job as a software developer for 2 of my friends from uni at their startup. So had a bit of an in there and just learned loads of the senior engineer there. That React and TypeScript and kind of front end stuff. And then, started freelancing. So that was like the next step after that. And then kind of freelance for a bunch of different startups. So that was kind of the path from engineering to coding.
And where did entrepreneurship come into it? Is that something that kind of, you said your mum has a business. Is that something that sort of ran in the family you've always wanted to do? Were you like a kid with a lemonade stand, or just sort of naturally evolve a bit later?
Yeah, it was definitely that desire to have my own thing was always there. I mean, just really unsuccessfully for loads of years. So like, I was definitely the kid that I was like buying chewing gum, taking it to school and then like selling it. And then like I was buying Lego in bulk. So I was buying like 10 kilos of Lego at a time on eBay, splitting it up into like small packets and then reselling it on eBay and just basically doing like arbitrage like that. So it was always like, I've always had little hustles and very few of them made any money. The Lego, I think I spent a whole summer on it and made like 400 or 500 quid, which sounds great. And then I worked out the hourly rate was like £2.50. So there was always little things I wanted to do. And then I think that was part of the reason for switching from engineering to coding was like with coding, you can literally launch your own thing as a one person team. Like to do that in engineering, basically impossible. I mean, it's really, really difficult unless you need capital. You probably need a team. It takes a lot longer to be senior and to like be a consultant and get those high day rates and stuff, which give you the freedom to own your own time a bit more. So that was part of the reason for switching. But my mum she's self-employed rather than having like a huge business, but she's self-employed. My brother has a little business. He's a tree surgeon. So there's definitely, I think, something in the family as well. So that was always there, that desire. And then once I was working as a freelance developer, I was doing stuff on weekends. So I was always doing like launching little projects and trying to get something off the ground.
Yeah, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, your first kind of major successful data fetcher was a site called Influence Grid, which lets people search for TikTok influencers for campaigns and that sort of thing. And something I think is particularly interesting is the sort of framework that you use to discover that idea and also to discover data fetcher. Do you want to talk a little bit about like how you use that to find like that framework to find low competition ideas?
Yeah, sure. So both Data Fetcher and Influence Grid kind of followed a very similar pattern. And essentially the framework is looking at like a new platform that's taken off. And there's a really good site to do this, which is called Exploding Topics. And looking at that. And then what it does is it basically services like Google search volume, Google trends, and shows you platforms, like ideas, just keywords, right? But like a lot of them are businesses or platforms or whatever that are taken off. And so in the case of Influence Grid, that was TikTok. For Data Fetcher, it was Airtable. And looking at like a similar platform but that's more mature, right? So for Airtable, that's just Google Sheets. For Influence Grid, it was Instagram. And basically saying, okay, so what exists on those more mature platforms that I could build. What's the equivalent tool I could build for the new platform? And essentially just building an equivalent tool as quickly as possible, and then relying on the fact that on this new platform, it's most likely going to be a need for the same tool for this thing, and then building it. And yeah, it seems to have worked quite well. I think it's quite good for indie hackers because it's like you're tying yourself to one platform, but it kind of makes it way more manageable. If you're willing to live with the platform risk of doing that, then you can often like find a little niche. So another example would be like Notion Forms, but by Julian, who's a huge success. Well, basically, notice that on Airtable, if you've got like a table of data, they give you just by like a default feature on Airtable, you can just create a form off that table and it'll have all the fields that correspond to all the fields in your Airtable. And he thought, why wouldn't people on Notion need this? Like this should exist for Notion. Notion just launched an API. So there's that element of like fortunate timing as well. And he basically built an equivalent tool for Notion Forms, and he's at like 13k MRR or something. So like, I think that framework can work really well. And I think the other nice thing beyond just like finding product ideas is it helps you with marketing as well. Because you look at what marketing did that original tool do, and I can just do that same thing for the new platform. So for my last project, I looked at what keywords all these Instagram platforms were targeting, replaced Instagram with TikTok in the keyword, and then just built all these landing pages. And the keyword volume was 0, right? But I could tell it was about to go up. And so you get some of the first landing pages and the first like results, and then slowly it just like ticks up. So yeah, I don't think it's a great framework if you want to raise funding or go for like a massive exit or whatever. But I think for kind of bootstrap indie type businesses, it can work quite well.
Yeah, I think it's a great framework, by the way. It makes total sense. Are there any other platforms that are taking off or have been taking off you think perhaps are worth looking at besides Airtable and TikTok, obviously?
Yeah, I think Notion. I'm desperate to come up with some sort of like Notion idea, because it just seems like the energy around like the Notion community and the stuff on like Twitter is just huge. Now that they've just launched an API, there must be kind of ideas out there. But yeah, I feel like Notion's the one that I'd be most looking at the moment. It's a bit of an obvious one, but yeah, that's probably where I'd be looking.
Yeah, I've seen some cool stuff. I've seen a product called Feather recently, which is like blogging on Notion. And obviously that's super as well for making websites, but there must be tons of other things you can use on it actually. Yeah. If people like spending all day in Notion and not having to leave it and doing more and more activity there, kind of think that makes sense.
I mean, even Super, right? There's Potion as well, which is just another version, which is just basically Super. It's just like another website builder of Notion. And then there's, I think, Help Kit, I think it's called, which is basically like within that niche of turning Notion into a website, turning it into a help center. So yeah, you could probably even fragment like existing tools into kind of specific niches, because the growth of that underlying platform is just so massive that yeah, you can turn it into a load of different use cases.
And yeah, with that same framework we've been discussing, so you eventually sold Influence Grid for, was it 55k, which is a great outcome. And you were kind of thinking about your next one. What was the story of how you used that framework thing come across Data Fetcher? Because it sounds like there were some other experiences you had which kind of all combined to lead you to it.
Yeah. So I was basically just sort of stumbling around trying to find the next idea. And so what that involved was, looking on exploding topics, looking at product ton, looking at like products forums, so like Notion's forums or Airtable's forums, or whatever, trying to find like little pain points so I could kind of fill. And it was also when newsletters were massive, like middle of 2020. So I thought maybe I can do some sort of programmatic newsletter where I don't actually need to write all the content. I can just kind of, have the content, have a bit of manual creation, but then it basically is just surfacing like numbers. And so the idea I kind of settled on was IPO alerts. So looking at upcoming IPOs and alerting like retail investors to the IPOs in the same way that like institutional investors might get alerted. And I wanted to manage all the content from Airtable. I'd seen that Airtable was like becoming really, really popular. And I thought, just as a kind of little test, maybe I could pipe all this data into Airtable and then use that to create the newsletter. And I wanted to do like a follow-up. So like, here's last week's IPOs. This is the starting price that they went onto the market as. Here's the price now, and has it gone up, down, whatever. And I couldn't find a nice way to just pull those stock prices in. There were a couple of tools, but they all seemed a bit like janky and a bit expensive or too hard, like too intense to like set up the stuff yourself. So I just pulled the prices in manually because it wasn't worth the effort trying the tools. So launched that, waited about a week, realized there was a much better IPO newsletter out there, and kind of, it was going to take a lot to like anywhere near that. And then a couple of weeks later was doing the daily product hunt like trawl, and saw there's a tool called API Connector, and that was data fetcher for Google Sheets basically. So a way to connect to APIs. And that was the light bulb moment, I guess, where I was like, okay, so that problem I had 2 weeks ago with Airtable trying to get stock prices in, this would solve that for Sheets. Why don't I build this for it? And yeah, the nice thing is API connector have now copied features from Datafetcher back into their tool. So we have like a really good relationship. And yeah, I didn't just completely clone it. I kind of looked at like why that worked, but then kind of looked also at like, how is Airtable different to Sheets? So it is fundamentally quite different in terms of how they treat data. It's a database, not a spreadsheet. So it wasn't just a case of like copying it, but it was like, use that as the starting point. And then how would you port this over to Airtable in a way that kind of makes sense? And interestingly, actually, I've just got a competitor. So my second competitor, like directly on the marketplace, and they've got a really successful Google Sheets add-on. They got like a similar number of installs, I think, to API connector, and they've just launched on Airtable. Luckily for me, they built it exactly as you'd build it on Sheets. So every time you do an import, deletes all your data and creates it from scratch, which makes like absolutely no sense. And so there is that nuance between platforms that you need to really pay attention to. And so, yeah, I think that's another reason to just go really hard on one platform rather than trying to like spread yourself too thinly across multiple platforms.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting topic as well, especially when it's more of a bootstrapped tool and you don't have like, teams of people who can just like take this and make it work across multiple platforms. It's, mostly you. What's your decision-making process around focusing on Airtable versus, maybe hiring some contract devs and trying to make it work on other things like Monday, maybe Sheets yourself, maybe something else?
For a long time, like definitely for the first year, I was thinking like, this is going to go multi-platform, and I was thinking like that's the way to remove that platform risk. And I actually ended up launching a Monday or trying to launch a Monday app earlier in the year with that aim of just being like, if I could get half the MRR from a different platform, or even like third or a quarter, even just some revenue stream that's not completely dependent on Airtable, that'd be worth doing. I got slightly burnt by that, mainly for technical reasons, but yeah, it just became really tricky to build on the Monday platform. And it actually started killing my motivation to work on the project at all. So I kind of sacked it off there for a few weeks. But yeah, it's definitely something I'd consider again, but I think it would be a totally different ballgame. Just in terms of development and the code base and like the maintenance of it, I think it would mean you'd probably want to raise like a little bit of funding, or would need to like plow most of the revenue into hiring like another like developer or two. Like I think it'd be really unmanageable as a one person team. And not that like you couldn't do it, but you couldn't do it to a really good standard. And I think the reason that people switch from Zapier to Datafetcher is that within that use case, I just pay more attention to detail than like even a big company can, because it's just so specific. Now, the flip side of that is if Airtable want to kill it at any point, or they want to build the equivalent thing and launch it into their product, they might, right? And so that's kind of terrifying. And so you also have to weigh up like, how likely are they to do that? And the way I look at it is they've got a feature called Sync, which lets you sync to like Salesforce or Google Calendar, whatever. And so there is a real risk that they could broaden that, but that sync feature is very no code. Like it's quite easy to use, but it's also like, because my tool is really flexible and people are using it with all these different APIs, I think it's really unlikely that Airtable would launch something that's like quite as flexible as that. And so I think I'm kind of building like just outside of where they want to go with their product, because their thing is slightly less technical. And so we overlap a bit for like certain use cases, because I've got certain no code, like these kind of like pre-built like templates. But yeah, I think they're quite happy that like Datafetcher fills this gap, and they're definitely going for like the ecosystem play and like having a platform where, the sum of what all the developers build across the platform, third party and their developers, is kind of bigger than what they could just build on their own. But yeah, it's definitely like, that's the big scary thing about the business. And I think, yeah, my kind of solution to that is probably just try and rinse it for all it's worth at the moment. By being in one specific platform, it means I can I check the Airtable subreddit and forums and stuff like that like every day. And so that just gives you like that little bit of like attention to detail that like a tool that's crossed loads of platforms doesn't have. So I want to rinse that for all it's worth, try and get as much of the funds in the profits into index funds. And then hopefully one day, if they do build it, or some massive competitor or something comes along, like hopefully I will have made enough money for it not to ruin my life. But yeah, we'll see. It's definitely that's a risk reward thing that's like pretty intrinsic to the business.
Because when a marketplace or app is making these sort of ecosystem plays, they've got to think about the trust that devs are going to have in that platform, that they're not just going to absolutely rug someone and just like copy their feature, which, Twitter, I think, made that mistake a few years ago when they just removed their entire, I think, most of their API access. Have you had much communication with Airtable about Datafetcher or anything else?
Yeah, I mean, they're a big fan of what I'm doing. They're really supportive. So yeah, I deal with the product manager on their like platform team who's responsible for like the marketplace and the API and kind of any kind of interaction with like third party developers. And yeah, like they follow me on Twitter. They celebrate when I have like a big milestone and stuff, or they'll like drop it in an email and stuff. So like they're super supportive so far. And like, I think so say with Apple, right? They've basically got a duopoly. And so there's been quite a few examples of them just basically like cloning someone's like iOS app into the operating system and someone just like completely losing their business overnight. I think with Airtable, because they're not like the only sort of tool that you like no code tool that you could use for that, I think the risk of that is a lot less because they, as you say, like they don't want to burn developers. They want to keep good relations. They want it to be a good thing to build on. And they've got a whole team dedicated to making it a good platform to build on. So I think the risk is less. At the same time, if all of their enterprise customers were asking for a tool like Data Fetch for free, like, yeah, they could totally build it. So I'm not kind of naive about that. I do think there's a decent chance of it working.
That's great to hear that they're very supportive like that. And I guess one of the other benefits of being on a marketplace is for marketing. I think you've said before that most of your installs come from the marketplace itself rather than outside Airtable.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it varies month to month, but like historically, it's probably about 80% of customers come, like I can see that they've just found it through the marketplace. They've searched for like API and then they've installed it. So yeah, it's been massive. And I think there's not that many apps in there. Like even 2 years after they launched it, it's probably only like 100 apps on the marketplace. So there's not like loads of people trying to build on it. Obviously that's going to slowly tick up, but like, yeah, it's a massive source of like leads at the moment. It's obviously hard to do attribution when you have a marketplace like that. This is like having your own site. So you can't put like a track and pixel or anything like that on there. So the way that I kind of try and do the attribution is looking at the use case that someone has. So when they become a customer and they see, is this one that I've got a YouTube video on, or is this just like their own stuff? And so if it's their own stuff, I just kind of assume they come from the marketplace. And then obviously asking people as well, like when I do support or like customer interviews. And yeah, most people say they just found it through the marketplace. So yeah, that's another huge benefit of being really early to the platform. Right?
Yeah. Besides the marketplace, your main growth channels are kind of educational blog posts and YouTube videos, like you were saying, right? And how did you arrive on those two? I mean, they make sense, but did you see like there were analogous companies where this had worked well and thought that was good for you? Or was there any other kind of things you tried?
Yeah, it was the same company I copied the idea from. So API Connector. So they've got a really thorough blog with all different use cases. And then they were just starting to experiment with YouTube videos as well. And they were getting some like good view numbers. And I spoke to Anna who runs it and she was saying that the YouTube videos were going really well. So the YouTube ones, there was a Airtable support post about someone's use case that they want to extract favicons from websites. So super specific. Yeah, I found an API where you could do that, made a little like 2-minute YouTube video and replied in the forums with that video just to test if anyone would watch it, if they'd follow it. And yeah, it answered their question. They followed it. And then over the next few weeks, I noticed that a few other people also followed that YouTube video. Like I hadn't promoted it anywhere, but clearly like YouTube surfaces it to people that are interested in Airtable. And then people were seeing it in the forum as well. So that was kind of, my experiment with that, inspired by API Connector. And then I kind of tried to take like a more systematic approach and looked at, what are the most common APIs that people connect into. So turning each of those into a tutorial. And it's worked really, really nicely. It's still hard to say like how to do the attribution exactly, but yeah, I think it works pretty well. And there's so many different topics I can do for it. And yeah, the nice thing about YouTube, I think, is whereas SEO, it takes quite a while to rank and stuff, YouTube will immediately start showing your YouTube video to people who are interested in Airtable. And so it's not like you need to then go and promote it on Twitter and on like whatever subreddits or whatever. It just kind of sits there and just slowly the views tick up. And even if the view numbers aren't that big, if it's a really specific use case like this, like the intent behind them is really high, right? So the chance of someone following it and then converting is pretty high.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point about, just because something doesn't get like tens of thousands of views doesn't mean it's not valuable, because like you said, it has very high intent. But something else I want to ask is just on the number of channels. Like, do you have to deliberately stop yourself from like trying out like, I don't know, paid ads or like a bunch of other things that like seem like sexy or they'd be valuable? Do you deliberately try just to keep it quite focused on like those two channels, or are you thinking of expanding?
Yeah, I'd love to now the MRR is a bit hard. Love to try like paid ads to see if I can get something working. I think as soon as I could see that a channel was working, it was a case of like, right, rinse that for all it's worth. And I definitely want to be more aggressive just within SEO and YouTube. So at the moment, I'm probably putting out 3 bits of content a month, 3 to 4. And I think love to get that up to like, 6, 7, 8. Like if I get 2 bits of content out a week, I think like that would be massive, as well as kind of moving up the funnel a bit. So at the moment, they're all super specific use cases. I think it'd be great to just like do Airtable content more generally and have people following for that and then eventually converting. But yeah, haven't really considered any other channels beyond doing like a few podcasts. So there's a couple of Airtable specific podcasts and then kind of the indie hacker building public thing as well, which I think has worked pretty well. Doing when people say like message on Twitter saying, do you want to do this like founder interview or whatever, just defaulting to yes, because as long as it doesn't take hours, it's a backlink and there's a chance it might get decent traffic. And had a good experience with that a couple of months ago where one of the interviews like was on top of Hack and News for ages. Probably got like a few hundred or a couple of hundred at least like quid of MRR off the back of it. And like the interview itself had taken like an hour. So yeah, that's why I'm here.
Hopefully it'll be the same for this one. Stick on a Happy News and Reddit. We'll see. There's a bit more of a lifestyle question, from like when you were starting your marketing plan and stuff. Did you always have like a ramen profitable goal, like a fixed figure in mind? Like I think you're the first person I saw tweet London ramen profitable, which is like, I don't know, 5k a month or something, probably higher than living in Chiang Mai. But do you always have that in mind? And did you ever consider like moving out of somewhere like London? Or were you always kind of like, I want to maintain the lifestyle of being here and just try and hit my goal?
Yeah, I think the big two of me were 5 and 10k. So 5 because it's like, yeah, that's kind of like you can live in London. You're not going to have an amazing lifestyle, but you can live like pretty decent lifestyle after costs and tax and stuff like that. And then 10 because it's like, that's pretty similar to what you make as a contract developer. I don't think I ever wanted to like move out of London. I just enjoy it too much. It wasn't really a case of like, I'm going to go like move to the middle of nowhere or go to some like low cost of living country to do this. That would have felt like too much of a sacrifice, I think. The way I kind of made it work financially, apart from selling Influence Grid, was doing freelance work as well. So yeah, I was doing a few days a week, or I'd work contract for a month or two. And then I moved on to like fixed price, like freelance projects. So I was actually doing Airtable extension development for like Airtable's enterprise people, and the rates were really healthy. And it was like, I could completely manage my own time. So they would basically, I'd have a month to do a few days of work. And so it meant that if support emails were coming in or I needed to get something out for data, like a bug fix or whatever, I could just focus on that and do the freelance stuff around that. So what I did was just use that to top up my finances and then gradually reduce the time. And I think like a lot of indie hackers seem to follow that path. And it works pretty well, right? Because you kind of de-risk yourself like financially and not kind of going all in. Having said that, it's a bit miserable. Like having to juggle the two is pretty hard, as you probably like find yourself like trying to deal with just the amount of stuff that piles up, knowing that you need to be keeping your freelance client happy wasn't great. So yeah, it's going full time, like just quality of life just went up massively. And so I was happy to pay it or kind of have a little bit less money coming in just for the reduction in stress, really.
I think this is a situation like more and more people are finding themselves in as they're building a business, and to pay the bills, they're also working part-time or sometimes full-time. Like I'm doing that myself. I contract a couple of days a week. I find the biggest issue is it's just like the context switching of like, having these two very different things to think about outside of like day-to-day life. Was there like any little tricks that you did or just like ways you worked just to help you just like be productive at both of these things without like, stressing yourself out too much?
Yeah, it's definitely a massive issue. I think the big one for me is that Paul Graham essay on like maker time and manager time. So it's basically, if you've got meetings, you think like, I'd put, one a day and then that's only an hour a day of meetings, whatever. But actually what you're better off doing is just putting all the meetings on one day. So yeah, trying to get them all into one day. And then the days where you don't have any meetings and ideally you're not doing the freelance stuff, you can just have a full day with 100% focus on your project. I think, yeah, once I switched to that, it made a huge difference. And then the other thing would be looking at Calm Fund and Tiny Seed. I think like the reason that they're really popular is because they get you over that initial hump of, yeah, I need to keep the money coming in my freelancing or my day job. So I think just having 50 or 100 or however much they give you grand in the bank to make that switch and fully commit I kind of didn't do that because I'd sold Influence Grade, and that was about 50k, which kind of felt like a bit of I had that safety net. But if I hadn't managed to do that, 100% would have looked at those options.
Would you say this kind of period where you were sort of working and building Data Fetcher, just managing that, was that kind of the most difficult part? Or has there been like another sort of situation which was like, would you say is your lowest point so far in building it that you managed to get through?
Yeah, it probably was that time. It was also just the very early days. So like the last project, Influence Credit, grew like a weed. Like I was adding like 500 to 1,000 in MRR each month from like the early months. The average price was like $60 to $70, and they're all churning. They're all going out the other side. But like over the short term, it just seemed to be growing really, really nicely. When I switched to this, it was like, I started with a price of $12 a month, I think it was, or 12. And so it was just ticking up so slowly. So even if you had a day with 2 or 3 customers, which felt great, it's still, you've only got up like 30 or 40, and then maybe you lose one, and it just was inching up so slowly. So I was trying to work out like, is this going to take like 5 years to get to Ramen, and just like real kind of, I guess, like crisis of confidence of like, is this the right thing to be working on? And then there was a month where it went down, and then I got really worried of like, I just spent like 6 months kind of, barking up the wrong tree. But I had a good chat with Michael from Ramen Club, and he basically said, like, basically just preached patience and said, you're essentially like, you're ahead of where a lot of projects are. Like, you're 6 months in, you're on a few $100 in MRR. Like, it probably will work. Like, this is no time. No one knows about it yet. Like, it's got no real momentum behind it. And so, yeah, those early days are still probably the worst. Yeah. And then there's been a few really horrendous sort of technical moments where, yeah, I've just made real stupid mistakes. I'm more of a front end developer by trade. And so been a couple of moments on the back end. I deleted the project in Google Cloud, so that all integrations that involve Google or YouTube or Google, like search analytics, whatever, they all just fail. And yeah, so I deleted it on a Friday, went out, woke up on a Saturday morning to like a customer email being like, why is my Google Analytics coming in? And like, luckily Google Cloud has a sort of undo mechanism that they keep your project around for like a month, which, yeah, might be the best UX thing I've ever seen from Google Cloud. But like, yeah, that was a pretty low moment as well. So yeah, there's been a few things like that where you just feel like a real imposter, actually, or a real cowboy. And it's like, how the hell has this got to the place it is? But yeah, I think the nice thing there is like, I'm going to be able to hire a developer quite soon. And so just having someone else to come in and kind of look at some of the weaknesses in the code base can be very nice as well.
Yeah, I guess that takes you to a whole new stage, right? As you bring on more people, we're sort of moving from the solo bootstrapper to kind of manager mode kind of thing. And like, because I think you also have marketing freelancers as well. Are you sort of already trying to get advice or getting clued up on that part of the journey, or you're going to sort of take it as it comes?
Yeah, I think at the moment I'm a little bit before that stage. So it's not quite like switching to like growing a small team and having a remote culture and that kind of stuff. At the moment, it's very much keeping it really lean. So the developer that I'm hiring is just going to do 1 day a week. He's traveling, just wants to do some freelance work. And we've worked together before at an old company. So it's going to be super informal. And then, yeah, both the marketers, it's just, I think we've only spoken over email for like 6 months now. So it's just, at the moment, it's just kind of using freelancers where necessary and where to pick up some of the slack. And I want to see how big we can get, just keeping it really lean like that. Longer term, it might be nice to have a team, right? It might start to get a little bit lonely just having like one full-time person. I say they're definitely open to it, but I don't think I'm quite making that switch. There will be, I think, a case of like trying to codify a bit of the knowledge that's in my head, especially like on the code, but then also on support and stuff like that, and just documentation. And yeah, at the moment, there's nothing. So yeah, there's definitely going to be a bit of a switch when even just a part-time developer joins, just to get stuff down and to document why certain decisions have been made, as well as just a switch from like, okay, this is the MVP and I need to get it out as soon as possible. And even the integrations, like trying to just hammer out integrations as quickly as possible to like suddenly like, okay, quite a few businesses, core operations are relying on this stuff. We really can't afford like major bugs because we will lose customers. And so I think there's probably a shift in speed of development as well, and just slowing down and being a bit more thorough and stable, I guess. So that's something I'm thinking about at the moment. Yeah, I think it is a bit of a mindset shift over the next couple of years.
Yeah, makes sense. Something else I know you've attributed to at least part of your success is kind of like gaining as a developer. And I know not all developers are keen on doing this, but like sort of more of an appreciation for user testing and user research and that sort of thing. There's something that's obviously close to me as I do a lot of user research in my day job. But yeah, do you want to talk a bit about sort of what your approach to it now is, a data fetcher, that you think is like something you want to continue doing?
Yeah. So originally, I think I had really taken on board this concept, like the mud test and stuff like that. Like, don't talk about solutions, only talk about people's pain points, their day-to-day like specifics and stuff like that. Never talk about your product. And for some reason, I kind of took that to the point of like, so never watch anyone use your product, which is definitely a completely separate thing. That's user testing versus like customer research. But yeah, so for the first year and a bit, probably only saw like a few people use it when I was on a call with them, whatever. And then sort of through accident, I changed the UX of it quite radically of Data Fetcher. So rather than it just being like an API tool, it was kind of like a no-code tool, right? And so because it was such a big change, I wanted to watch like a load of people use the app. And so I had like a load of calls, some with like, Ramen Club members like self, and then some with existing customers. I gave them like a free month, whatever, to get them to do it. And then I saw all of these UX issues in the rest of the app and in like other bits of the UI and stuff that I just had been there for months. And so, the rest of it improved loads. And I suddenly realized like I should have been doing this the whole time. Like just basically telling someone, okay, try and do X. I'm going to shut up now, and then just watching them do it on a call. And it was huge. So what I do now basically is I don't have any sort of formal thing where I'm like, okay, I need to keep doing that. But I have a thing where anyone can book a support call. So there's a Calendly on the website. And so anyone like free user or paid can book a support call. And what happens on like 80% of those support calls is they share their screen, and then I watch them setting stuff up, and I see bugs, and I see like other bits and pieces, and I try to see what they do instinctively and then tell them how to do it. Obviously within without being totally unhelpful, but that's quite good because it kind of forces me to do that user testing like most weeks. Yeah. And then the other thing actually similar to that is for a long time, I wanted to like outsource the support as soon as possible, just like get a part-time customer support rep that could do everything. And now I've realized actually it's way too soon to do that until the product's like more mature. I think doing that's actually just going to like cut off the biggest source of feedback. So it's annoying doing all the like, I don't know, reset my password or change my pattern or whatever, but that's only about half the support. The other stuff is super nitty gritty, like UI feedback, or you start noticing that the same setting is being misconfigured like over and over, and you need to kind of make the label clearer or make like the default a different setting, whatever. So that's been a massive help actually. And as you say, it's not, as a developer, you're not really used to doing that, but it's super important, I think.
It sounds like, obviously you've learned a lot from doing this and from doing Influence Grid and that sort of thing. What's the most common advice you tend to give like other aspiring bootstrap founders based on your experience?
Yeah, I think launching something pretty quickly is the big one. I think you do see people spending like 6 months on something and then launching it. So I think that you probably need to launch with like less features and less kind of quality than you think. So if you can launch something in 2 or 3 months, just use the tech stack, assume you've got like products and Reddit and stuff like that as an initial test of will anyone pay for this? Not as a scalable market channel, but just trying to get something ASAP and then launching it. You can get 1 or 2 customers through that, and then you can find a scalable market channel. Like that's all you need, right? So that's probably just launching quicker than you think you need. Like Influence Grid, the first version of it, if you upgraded, like bought an account, all that changed is the sign in header changed to sign out. Like there was nothing except the TikTok data, and that's what people are there for. And so, I think you can actually get away with a lot less stuff than you need if you're solving like a real pain point for people.
It sounds like you try and get some sort of signals that something might be interesting, to start working on something. Like you saw that Airtable taken off and something similar works on Google Sheets, and that was enough to get you started. But you don't really know for sure until someone starts paying for it. But like how much kind of effort or time are you willing to put in to go from like, I've come up with an idea to, okay, it's possible someone can pay for it now kind of thing?
I think you probably want you want to find one use case, right? So like one specific path through the product. And so for Data Fetcher, that was like importing data from an API. But things like what it does now is it'll look at like, okay, what type of data is Is it emails? Is it URLs? Is it image attachments? Whatever. And it'll suggest fields, and it's super nuanced within that. The original version basically just pulled it back, was opinionated about what fields it was going to map to an Airtable, and just like threw it in there. And it was like really pretty tricky to use, but it did do that one core thing. So I think it's basically trying to find that. And often that's like a forum post, or that's someone on Twitter being like, is there any way to do this in Airtable or something like that? And so, basically just finding one like happy path through it and then building something that solves that. But I'm afraid there's not like a really nice, like sort of general test of it. I think each case is a little bit different, right?
Yeah. I think everyone's looking for a formula sometimes with these things. And I think it comes from I think instinctively you learn it from trial and error and shipping a few things, seeing what works and what doesn't, sort of thing. So no, I think that was a perfectly reasonable answer. But I think sometimes people are looking for a paint by numbers of how to create a successful business, and it just doesn't always exist. There's just sort of principles that do and don't work, right?
Yeah. I mean, I had an experience recently where I tried to launch another project using the Stable Diffusion to create art prints. And with that, I almost still feel like there's something there, but I felt like I'd built the happy path and over a week, no one bought anything. And I thought that's enough of a signal that my sort of this, that's not going to work.
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of where you want to go from here, do you have a vision for where you want to take Data Fetcher in, let's say, a 3-year time frame, in terms of any goals in terms of revenue or team, or just what the product does, basically?
Yeah. In terms of the product, I think for the next few months at least, there's a lot further to go just within this core concept, pulling data in from somewhere else into it. There's massive tools built on Google Sheets. There's one called Supermetrics. It's 100 million ARR, and they're essentially just connecting to marketing APIs and pulling that in. So I know there's a lot more room to grow just within that use case. Beyond that, I might start to think more about kind of two-way sync. So syncing it with Webflow and Airtable and having kind of more platforms and then more directions. So not just going from somewhere else into Airtable. So that's kind of how I think about the product, but I definitely just want to do one thing really, really well rather than trying to make it too broad. I think that's the reason that people use it at the moment, is because it's really good at that one thing. And every time you introduce something different, you risk complicating that, making it harder. In terms of team, still pretty open question. As I said, I want to keep it really lean for now and just keep the profit margins high, but longer term, it might be fun to grow a little team. I do worry a little bit with platform risk on that one, where it's if it's just my livelihood and freelancers where you have no obligation to keep funding them, then that's fine. But if I wanted to hire people full time and give people sort of longer term opportunities, I would worry a bit more about the platform risk, I think, than if it was other people's livelihoods at risk. So maybe that's something that comes after it's become a broader tool. But that stuff feels quite a way off. For now, it's keep the team really lean, keep adding integrations and tightening up the UX. And then, I'd love to get to 1,000 customers, sort of 300 at the moment. Love to get 1,000 customers in a couple of years and just keep the profit margins really high and keep funneling off the funds into more diverse income streams. And I've got a couple of other SaaS ideas as well. So in some ways, I think Data Fetcher might be the perfect project to use as a cash cow basically, and accept that, it probably won't be around in 10, 15 years because Airtable might be irrelevant, but it's a perfect kind of small to medium SaaS business. I can use the freedom and the funds from it to launch other slightly bigger ideas. So who knows?
That sounds awesome and very achievable. Are you ready to drop the alpha on those other SaaS ideas yet? Or are you keeping your cards to your chest for now?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Yeah. Probably wise. Before we open up to a few questions from the community, I saw this interesting quote that you said on the end of one of your blog posts related to what you were just saying, actually. And Data Fetcher, which is diversify the profit, not the product. So in terms of where you kind of spend that revenue in other maybe non-SaaS areas rather than creating shitloads of similar features or different features. Yeah. Do you want to touch a bit on that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think it, as a business, as a product, it does sit in this really nice sweet spot at the moment, right? So there's no VC backed company on the marketplace that's coming and built an app, because the total opportunity is just probably not big enough. So there's obviously the platform risk of Airtable, but the risk of massive competition, I think, is reasonably low. So there are a couple of competitors. They're similarly small teams or one person businesses, and I kind of back myself against them, but there's no £200 gorilla that's going to come in and crush me at the moment. And so I think given that, it sits in this lovely sweet spot where it could completely change my life. If you get to 500k ARR, that's completely life changing, right? but it's also way too small for any sort of massive competition. And so why not shoot for that? I'm kind of a third away there. That seems like a really like big goal, but doable. So that's kind of how I look at like the competition, like the financial side. And then I don't think you need to complicate the product to get there. So it can just stay where it is, keep making it better, keep improving the marketing and get to that. But obviously if you can keep the profit margins really good, you could then be funneling off, I don't know, 100, 200 grand a year into index funds or like rental property or something that's more of a surer long-term thing. And so I think that would be a great way to kind of de-risk over 5-10 years. So that's kind of how I think about it. Like trying to use it as like I said, like a cash cow rather than being like, oh, I'm going to try and make it everything to everyone and then starting to compete with Zapier and like, I mean, there's loads and loads of integration tools and connectors. You work for one, right? There's literally dozens of like ones with like serious funding. So I think trying to compete with them head to head would be really difficult, but trying to just stay in my lane could get to somewhere where this is like completely changed my life and livelihood without like a massive risk of it not working. I guess it's like the whole indie hacker ethos, right? Of like, do you want to raise funding and go for the 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 billion dollar exit, or do you just want to bootstrap steadily and get to something that's doing a few hundred grand, a bit like a little bit more in ARR, and then having a really nice lifestyle business.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because like as a bootstrapper, once you get to like a certain degree of success or growing quickly, suddenly you get interest from investors when you don't need them or don't need them as much as maybe when you're like starting out. So it's a interesting paradox. But yeah, what you're saying, I think that's definitely something for a lot of bootstrappers to aspire to. So just before we open up to others, are there any other kind of questions that you've done a lot of these interviews now, Andy, or like, there's something speeding up the last year or so, but like, are there any questions that nobody ever asked you or things that you want to talk about that you would like to?
Not really. I mean, it's going to sound like a plug, but I do think like you do need people around you that are doing similar stuff. Like I think the MRR would not be as high without doing stuff on Twitter, Ramen Club. And then the other one actually is not just people at a similar stage, people a little bit ahead of you. So I've been lucky to meet a couple of people, customers who've given me really good advice, and then reached out to a couple of people through Twitter and just said, how do you feel about mentoring me? And people who are sort of 2 to 10 years ahead of me, just basically asking them if they could be like an infrequent mentor. And so whenever there's been like a huge decision, like do I try and build a Monday app or like whatever decision it is, basically just like talking it through with them as well. So I think, it is. I think people probably underappreciate how important the network is. And I definitely did, like starting out where I just, kind of just build and launch. And I think it's all about the tech and the marketing, but actually so much, because it's just you, so much of it is your motivation and your decisions. And that comes from people around you, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. Because I also think there's just certain types of questions where like, there's just not like a piece of content written or good piece of content written on every question that's easy to find. Like a lot of these questions are like, they're kind of better answered like in conversations or like in communities and that kind of thing. There's also some things people don't really want to write about too much publicly, or they don't think there's a big enough audience. So
Yeah.
Yeah. All sorts of things like, books and blogs and YouTube is great, but sometimes you just need to ask like a real human who's been there.
Yeah, definitely. And often the situation is slightly unique or slightly, like it's a recent, I don't know, a recent change, stats in general and stuff that the blogs that I've written about it are 5 years out and say like the things that used to happen don't really make sense anymore. You need someone who's kind of got their ear to the ground.
Yeah. And I think also sometimes when the answers you get from like asking someone in a similar position, it's a lot more sort of earnest, like the answer, whereas a lot of the stuff that's easy to find on say Google was sometimes just SEO to death and just trying to get you to like sign up to something. And that makes a difference as well. Cool. All right. Well, we've got some time to open this up to a few kind of questions from the community. So, first up, what percentage of customers come from Airtable Marketplace versus other channels?
Yeah. So it's probably about 70 to 80%. Yeah. It really varies. Like I thought that all the extra marketing I was doing was driving it up. And there were a couple of months at the start of this year where it was going up to like 40%. And then it slowly started creeping down again. So I'm not totally sure why that is, but like, yeah, generally it's about 30%. And yeah, it's, as I said, like, it's really hard to do the attribution, but it's people I could see directly came because the way that I do it, as I say in the tutorial, like, save your request with this name. And then I can see from their usage, like, have they done that? And yeah, it's about 30%, which is nice because it means you can work out like a return on investment on a video. So if you can see that 5 people followed that video and your lifetime value is $200, you'd be happy to pay something under $1,000 for a video. So yeah, it varies, but it's about 70%.
From Airtable Marketplace, would you say you were fortunate that people were already searching for API solutions?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I mean, yeah, there was definitely a underlying need. And it's interesting because there is scripting on Airtable. It's probably something I should have mentioned. So you've got all these no-code tools, like Zapier or whatever. And then you've got a lot of APIs and stuff that aren't on Zapier there. And then there's scripting. So there's like an Airtable extension that lets you write kind of JavaScript in the Airtable and import stuff. So my sweet spot is between those two extremes. Yeah, is kind of nearer the scripting, and then I'm kind of moving it more and more towards Zapier as it becomes more no coding. But yeah, people are already looking how to do this. Yeah, one thing I didn't say is because my sweet spot is semi-technical people, it does increase the support. You often have to help people understand the API that they're trying to connect to, and then how to use data fetching can be a bit tricky. But I think it's quite like, that means that they're not going to be able to write a script and replace it super easily. It's quite good in a way. Yeah. Another thing about that actually is because the marketplace is really early, there's no like marketplace SEO or anything too sophisticated versus like Shopify. I think they're constantly like ranking the different apps against each other to the point when like now when people launch on Shopify, they'll make the app free for 6 months just to get ratings and reviews and like climb those rankings, and then they'll turn on paid stuff. Luckily, Airtables is so new and the number of apps is so low that generally there's not that like cutthroat competition for search terms. It's more just, having a few keywords in there. If they search for any of those, then data fetcher shows up.
Andy, thank you so much for coming on this pod. Great to speak to you as ever, and really insightful answers. I think it's going to be really, useful for people like in a similar or slightly earlier position, or, trying to reach your kind of success with data fetcher. So yeah, very much appreciated.
Awesome. It was a pleasure.
See you soon, man.
Cheers. Bye.
Bye.